Oh, hi there. We're glad you're watching one of our virtual lunch presentations. We have a lot of good information that we've been accumulating over the past several years, and we invite you to look down just below here and hit the subscribe button, and the little bell will give you a reminder of when our next presentation is published here on the YouTube channel. Thanks for your support. Appreciate it. So our topic today really is the NAB show, the things that were seen, the things that we didn't get to see, those of us that didn't get to go, and some of the good stuff that is coming along. John Belk has been referred to us today. I'm so glad of that, from Groundlinks. He's a senior science and technologist. He's dealt with physics, optics, material science in countries all over the world. He's a member of the American Physical Society, Optica, and left Boeing as a Boeing Technical Fellow. So his background is really tremendous in everything from energy transfer to fiber sensors to
Tribological.
Thank you.
Tribology, friction and wear.
Thermoelectrics, conductive nanomaterials, and on and on and on. And John, you delivered a paper at the show, did you not?
Yes. Yes, I delivered a paper on grounding.
Yes.
But mainly it was, the overall topic was don't forget your ground. They've got a lot of things changing around them, everybody there, but essentially, I showed a lot of scary pictures of bad things, much of them corrosion, much of them just bad ideas, and a couple puzzling things, and tried to get the message across to go audit your system, fix it. And when you start thinking about how much energy you're dissipating, just think about that silly little rod down there all by itself, and what energy you're throwing into it. And I mentioned to them that we were trying to apply some electrophysics to energy dissipation and charge transfer to that simple rod. And that's what Groundlinks was about. We couldn't really go do advertising, but I wanted to let them know that some of the issues that come with a simple ground rod faced with all of the acronym heavy technologies coming at them and frequency systems. On top of that, you have lightning, which has more broadband energy than most people recognize. It's not just DC. There's that beautiful 60 gigahertz or 60 megahertz peak. There's a lot of material that it doesn't just go away. The energy takes a while, and the frequency content has a fair amount of higher content. It's not as nearly as impressive as the low frequency stuff. So I was trying to just give people a sense to, first and foremost, go check your system, look for your corrosion, don't forget about it. And if you're still getting a lot of damage, there might be some hope out there from people like us. That was the basis of it. And it's driven on my exposure to this has been relatively recent. When I came to Blue Ridge, I had left Boeing pseudo-retired, just tired, and it wasn't as much fun anymore. So right after I left, I got awarded a large Army contract for something I'd been working on prior to that, which you might find a bit interesting, somewhat technically, that can lead you into understanding why I found this somewhat alluring to go play with. And I had been working with some young guys, and I had been deeply involved in the whole nanotechnology as a viable science. From the government side, Boeing was paying me 30% of my time for several years to go help the government push that notion and to get Boeing ready for the nanomaterials coming at us and the advances we could make. So towards the end, I was working on combinations of materials and nanomaterials to handle lightning strike for example, the 787 Dreamliner, which is not a big metal body. It's a carbon fiber body, a fuselage, and that's a different game. We had been doing a lot of that kind of work with expanded metal foils in fighter jets, for example, and other composite materials that needed to be similarly protected from lightning strike and static dissipation. So at the moment, there are at least 3 production lines running on a little material that we developed that's being made by a company called General Nano. Now they're going towards Velo. It's called Velo Strike, and it's basically a carbon nanomaterial combined with nickel nanofibers. And that combination gave us the minimum damage for pick a lightning strike that was typical, the standard test. The amount of damage to a composite fuselage was lower with our material, but only slightly compared to normal, but at a significant lower weight. So the 787 and any subsequent aircraft would have been lighter based on that, hundreds of pounds lighter on the lightning strike protection system compared to what would have done conventionally. And the Army contract was for missile casings, but that's not the big production line. And the problem is they can't tell me what it is. My clearance has been expired. So I'm sitting here as one of my children, my technical children is out there, and I don't even know what they're using it for. I can take some guesses, but that's about it. But that's that electrophysics of how do you get a mass amount of charge without damaging the structure you're in was where I started from this. And the guys that had started Ground Links prior to me had stumbled on a combination of metal and carbon fiber without really understanding what was going on, and it was performing better than they realized. So I sat down with them for dinner one night just to help them understand, and I found out that grounding wasn't nearly so boring as I had thought it was.
Well, there's big changes in grounding, and having spoken with Tom over the past months,
Yeah.
I think it's interesting what you folks have done. Tom's going to be with us on May 19th and probably talk about some of the things that you've put together. And in fact, he might even invite you along. We never know, Tom. But yeah, it's not just sticking a ground rod into the ground and hooking to it. There's a whole lot more to be thought of. Jeff Welton talks about ferrites all the time, and others talk about not having sharp turns, but it's still, there's more to it than just that. So looking forward to hearing more about that. Marcos sent me a note here on the YouTube side. He says, my point of view was that it was all about cloud from Nautel, Wide Orbit, and Telos. Now, David Stewart, I know, was there. And David, if you want to comment a few things, I'd be more than happy to turn the floor over to you. And anyone else, either stick your hand up or let me know in the chat box, and we'll
it may not have been a majority subject, but it was a plurality. Workflow products, software to manage other software, especially for video, for program content. That seemed to be everybody's deal. Was okay, from writing it and storyboarding it to streaming it and ringing the cash register. Managing that workflow is kind of the phrase of the show. I thought it was interesting. It was great to see people, but a lot of the traditionally bigger exhibitors sort of had their people spread out over dealer booths, or they would partner with other people. So they were there, but you'd have to find them. Gates Air did have a pretty good sized booth, and we got Barry's note almost as I got to Vegas that they were changing hands. There wasn't much talk of that in the booth. Over at the Imagine, what is Imagine's real name? What the other company that apparently is not included in the deal, and they were as far from Gates Air, I guess, as they could get it.
Well, now Gates is purchased by Thompson, which, as Dana pointed out, they've owned the RCA trademark since 1987. Which is an interesting combination there of Thompson, Gates Air, and RCA.
And back when they
recently, I think they also got Technicolor, and are they actually going under the Technicolor name now?
Yeah, that's the corporate name out of Madagascar. David?
I was wasn't aware about the Technicolor connection, but being in radio, it's been a long time since KFWB color radio. I thought it was a pretty good show. It was good to see everyone. It was good to get around. The West Hall, I went looking to see if there was a monument somewhere that said on or about this spot, Martians destroyed the Landmark Hotel, but didn't find anything like that. Xperi was showing the multitude of things they have and talking about some extensions to the markup language for what you can do with the dashes of car radios.
Just use the right file extension on your images.
I wanted to ask about it, and I thought, okay, do you have error trapping for this? It's not unprecedented or unknown, but it can be really handy.
I understood a lot of the exhibitors were having virtual displays. Not so much people in the booth, but a screen. Did you find that way, David?
I didn't come across a lot of that, but that may have been higher tech things than me. I was looking at hardware. Sometimes find it like I never found at about the point I was leaving, someone told me where BE's people were hiding. They were in someone else's booth. And I talked to Kyle McGrill of Circuit Works. And one of his side things now is he apparently has bought the P-Tech line and is trying to figure out, now that he's America's largest manufacturer of broadcast transmitters, the best American transmitters, of course, are made by our friends at Nautel. So, he may have a niche in there for himself.
Interesting. Yeah, P-Tech and to a lesser extent, Armstrong and American Amplifier Technology. That's pretty much.
Crown is still with us. Yeah, it becomes, you could be the biggest and not be moving hundreds of machines or 1,000 machines a year or something. Or there's, I don't know what the number is, but it's not a huge number.
I'm not super familiar with P-Tech, but I always thought of them as an amplifier company. Do they make exciters?
They do.
Okay.
To a degree, I think they started, and I may be wrong, but I think they started as building the IPAs for the Continental transmitters, the Collins and Continental FMs, and then slowly built into a complete transmitter. But the problem was that the design wasn't particularly stable, and a lot of people reported that they'd had problems with them.
Through 2 or 3 ownerships, they've had 2 or 3 major redesigns. Kyle got involved doing the remote control aspect of it, and I never noticed it, but apparently 2 or 3 years ago, as you started logging into your P-Tech, it looked like you were logging into your Sycon 8 or similar Circuit Works product like that. But Kyle, what I got from him was basically he was able to buy the thing for something less than the cost of the parts. And it started as a availability of parts, since many things are getting supply chained. If someone is going to make you a good deal on a garage full of parts, it might behoove you to look into that.
By the way, Marco's message is back. Yeah, your comment about workflow management software. Yes, I didn't even think of that. That was everywhere.
Like I said, if not a majority, it was probably the plurality, the hot topic issue. And I didn't need it for anything, but I mean, you have an exhibit where you're showing virtual Post-its on a desktop, or a whiteboarding program that'll, copy. I'm like, okay, I stopped to look at it because I live my life by, little project management things.
Now, Nautel had the VX transmitters, at least 9 or 10 different models. And
from 150 watts to 5 kilowatts in 2 form factors, the up to 1 kilowatt or 2 kilowatts in 2 rack units, and then it turns into, that unit becomes your control head and your exciter for the three RUs more, and they'll do 3, 3.5, 4, and 5. Had one at the Broadcasters General Store booth. Had one of the 2 RU ones. Didn't get it out of the rack to see how heavy it was, but otherwise it looked like what they described.
The specs are much lighter. I don't have that handy at this instant.
That the big one, if you pull out the power supplies, which access through the front, it reaches an under 50-pound air shippable. You can ship it as carry-on luggage or as luggage, which is kind of neat. The little one that it's not, it is a little transmitter, but it's only about 20 inches deep. You don't have to have back rails. They say the power supply is efficient enough that you can do a kilowatt TPO feeding it 115 volt AC, that you can do it on a regular cord in a 15 amp breaker.
That's pretty
These
efficient.
are FM.
Yes. Yes, it's a titanium power supply. I didn't realize we had various grades, but I'm assuming it's bronze, silver, gold, platinum, titanium, but it's supposed to be a 96% power in to power out efficiency.
We'll probably have Jeff talk about that a lot more next week when he is our presenter. I noticed also in the Nautel booth that the AUI had a rather large place and wasn't so much in the private meetings on Sunday, but the live demonstrations there on the floor on Monday and Sunday, Monday, Tuesday.
They skipped over the Sunday afternoon AUI session, and Jeff said that was because they were doing it in the booth. You could come by, sample it if you had any suggestions to come by and do that.
Hands-on is always good, isn't it? That's one of the best things about the NAB show over the years, is that you can come and literally put your hands on the equipment and feel it and see it. And it's not a matter of calling a tech support guy who says, now look at the left hand in the back, there's a little capacitor there on the board. And when you get to know the piece of equipment, you feel much more secure.
At this late date, that's one of the best things, is to go to the booths and look at tech support people, possibly put your hands on them around their breathing passages and squeeze down on them, because they may not reply to phone calls, emails, or text, but you get the chance to jack them up at their booth. Now that's living.
And that was another thing that I got from your comments, that although there were fewer people from many of the manufacturers, they tended to bring their best answer people, you said, to the show.
I did, yeah. If they had an equivalent of a Jeff Welton or a Kirk Harnack, someone who maybe doesn't know everything, but they know a lot, and they sure can connect quickly with the actual real answer. Yeah, everybody had their royal smart person there.
Well, that's good. That's the sort of thing that really, again, NAB has been less important for many people. In fact, I understood that very few of the large consolidators sent anybody this year, if at all. And therefore, a lot of the folks that normally would be there weren't. And it was an opportunity for those who were there to develop some relationships and get to know some of these tech support people. And when they did need help, it's much easier to get something going. There's one more thing that you mentioned, David, that, and then we'll invite others to speak up about their experience or their questions. And that was, you sat in the Tesla car.
Yeah, this may just be attributable to human error, but it sure looked like a human in the front seat driving. Now, if you tell me it's artificial intelligence and it drove itself, like I said, clearly when this is cropped up before, it has always been human error. It's the first time I've been that close to a Tesla. It was quiet. The run between Central and the West Hall was very fast, but they had drivers, and I said, okay, you get your regulatory approvals. Will this be self-driving? They said, not this car, not with this setup, that there is more to do.
All right.
Did it
But
have
I'd
an
heard
AM
that
radio?
before, as it was rumored before, it was just, it will be. I'm like, okay, wasn't quite that.
All right, Eric, you mentioned that you were there, and Wayne, you mentioned that you were there. Either of you have a comment you'd like to toss at this point?
No. J, S, C as in Charlie, H, and then ER.
Okay, I'm going to guess, Larry, that's not what you don't want us to hear that. Okay. Hey, Wayne.
Well, I enjoyed the ride in the Tesla. That was not my first, but that was my first ride in a Tesla under a tunnel. And I took advantage of that several times to go back and forth between the halls. In fact, Monday afternoon, I had several carts of goodies to get over to the West Hall to set up for the SBE meeting, and was impressed with how much stuff you can put into the trunk of a Tesla. But anyway, that was kind of an interesting project. And talking to the drivers in the different cars, you kind of got different parts of the story of what eventually would happen. And I think this weekend they said another section of this thing's supposed to open up. But
It goes over
anyway,
the South Hall.
yeah, it was only the south to the yeah, it's only to the South Hall. So
Yeah, so you went
but
west to central or central to west, and then
yeah.
they'll open up the South Hall for the next big convention.
Yeah. So I guess as far as you know, NAB was concerned, I spent about
Okay.
about half of my time involved in various activities and not on the show floor looking, but I had a pretty short shopping list of things to look at, but they were all TV related rather than radio, although I did make it to the Nautel booth, particularly to look at the AUI and actually see that it really did exist. Finally saw one of the Innovonics HD modulation monitors in person. Otherwise, the comments about all of the digital workflow stuff was really on target, I guess, particularly in the video world. That whole world of video production is moving to that cloud environment. A lot of products, I'll be honest, I had no clue what they were selling. Even after you got the elevator pitch, I still had no appreciation for, and I guess I'd rather go look at transmitters and, feed line or something over at ERI rather than a monitor with some kind of,
Sure.
GUI on it of something I didn't even understand why you need. So otherwise it was the less people was sort of nice. I wasn't really anywhere that was terribly crowded other than the Starbucks line was healthy as always. So that part getting around was pretty good. I will say the attendance at both the ham radio reception on Tuesday night was really good, as well as the annual SBE meeting on Monday night. That was all well attended. Had no clue what that might be. Let's see, Saturday afternoon, I was involved in the NAB small medium market radio forums. That was very well attended.
Well, as long as you mentioned TV transmitters, ATSC 3 had a fairly large booth, as I understand it, and a lot of
Yes.
demonstrations and discussion, both of the transmitters and the receivers that will be added to the ones already on the market. And what did you think of that booth?
Well, I think the area that I probably spent the most time in was there seems to be a major emphasis on the enhanced emergency alerting capability. of ATSC3. So there was a lot of promotion of that, and that's probably where I spent most of the time. I did a casual course look at the receivers, and they really are products that are out there. You know, you can go to Amazon and spend a couple $100 and you know, be in business there.
Absolutely, absolutely. And again, for those of you that that are interested, we're going to have a presentation from Digital Alert Systems on text to speech, which is part of this ATSC3 EAS and all the new features there. So that'll be good. You mentioned ERI. They have some new products that they showed off this year, which was interesting. They're mostly, as far as I remember from what I read, they're doing hybrid software, two models that they brought, which were said to be more efficient than previous hybrids. Is that what you saw, Wayne?
Well, I saw a display, but honestly, I chatted a little bit with a couple of people I know in the booth, and oh, that was about the extent of it. I didn't honestly, that wasn't an area I really had any interest in.
Not a problem. I'm sort of segueing here a little bit because ERI and Jampro had combiners, and Dielectric had new product as well, both the pylon antenna and the RF Hawkeye software, but they also had a combiner as well. And I don't know if you didn't see that, Wayne, maybe somebody else did and wanted to say something. In fact, Mark Fellig is just joining us at the moment. Mark Fellig is involved with Jampro, and maybe he'll tell us about the combiner that Jampro had. Mark, that was your cue. Maybe he doesn't have his microphone up yet.
Speaking of FM antennas, one of the companies, I guess, just filed something recommending the FCC not accept pure computer modeling, or maybe it was over a certain gain or something, just that it may cause interference.
Yeah, the NAB has taken a fairly negative attitude toward that, haven't they?
Yeah, I think I saw it from one of the antenna companies, and it's interesting to compare that to AM, where basically no field strength readings are required. Hopefully your measurements are good.
Yeah. Probably mostly about a couple of orders of magnitude of scale. We always knew that from AMs that you could mark off a spot on the sidewalk, come back to it year after year and say, this is my spring reading. But for FM, that anything that was at 100 megahertz, you could wiggle the rabbit ears or the meter or one step either way. You were looking at the standing waves around it. I could see it being more critical. It certainly is harder to measure out in the real world. The thing I think we need is some follow-up compliance type things that once the system is built, could we get verification that you use the provided directors and parasitics rather than building lookalikes out of fiberglass or something?
Is anyone doing drone field strength readings to get a large amount of data and also get away from reflecting surfaces?
There are several companies that are doing that now, and some of them are having very good results, and some of them are still learning what's going on there.
I see a hand waving.
Yep. In my session, there was a talk on exactly that, on measuring field strengths, you know, the antenna properties using a drone. So if you look in that, look on the content of the show, there might be a hook there. It's a chap that was doing it, and they were discovering mostly the shape in their studies of various towers of what they're putting out. But there were some, there was one they showed an example where it was putting out under half of what it claimed. So it was very helpful for the operators.
There's going to be an awful lot of continuing improvement, I think, in terms of intermod activity, in terms of VisWAR with these combiners and such to maximize the power. Although let's face it, when you're throwing 100 kilowatts out the door, 20, 30 watts doesn't really mean all that much. But still in all, you want to have it as clean as possible and reduce the intermod and other products that can cause trouble along the way.
I did see the dielectric pylon antenna, Barry. It was pretty much everything the fact sheet said about it. The question, I was there with the tower guy from El Paso. His question, what we kept wondering was, okay, is it sturdy enough that you could stack another antenna on top of it? Because it looks like many of these stackable TV antennas we see these days. And it would probably have to be the top thing because it's fairly light. It has a very low internal part count. It is a slotted cylinder inside a bigger cylinder, or that's not true. It is a strip line at the back of a slotted cylinder. And periodically you have little elements that hang off the front at a certain angle. And by varying those, you can vary the amount of power you couple, and you can change the power, horizontal, vertical, change the axial ratio.
Yeah, that's interesting, and it's probably one of the major unveilings or major changes in models of the FM antennas that we have seen in quite some time.
That they were actually done in the 40s and 50s when it was a horizontal only world. And you read about papers of it from the time. They actually said, yeah, we have to take steps to make sure we don't introduce a vertical component by accident.
Mm-hmm.
The old Western Electric clover leaves would alternate pitch every bay. And on this one, they were just aware it would do it. They would use it for TV. It's the thing that kept it from being more common was a slot is in and of itself, it's a fairly narrow band structure. I believe for UHF, the way you get around it is you build a lot of slots of a lot of different sizes.
And then ATSC3 has now discovered that they can play the phase game and double the bandwidth, which is very interesting. Davicom had a lightning strike counter. Did anyone see that?
They've had several lightning sensors in their line for a while. I didn't know they had a dedicated counter.
It's a new one, the DVLC1, that was to be shown for the first time here. And so that was kind of interesting, I thought. Was it Wayne that mentioned the HD monitors from Innovonics? The question becomes, now that this is what, the second basic manufacturer that does HD monitoring, is this something that stations are going to use? As Paul Simon said, the sound of silence.
Well, they're not required anymore.
True.
So would they spend the money on something like that, or
Well,
just
that's
just get an HD receiver just to listen?
Turn it up until it distorts.
Right. There you go.
So you hit 0 dB full scale. I think that's been one of the reasons that Bellar has all but disappeared.
I was just wondering about Bellar. Were they there, and what's going on? They went very DSP in the last few years.
But do I understand correctly that there were a lot of vendors there that actually did not have booths, but yet their representatives were there on the floor?
That was the impression I came away with.
Like Telos.
The meeting I was just in, somebody mentioned that, so interesting.
Yeah, Telos had people there, but did not have a booth, and it was almost impossible to track anybody down to have a meaningful conversation.
Wow.
Yeah, they were doing intercom systems over at Amazon Web Service. They had a new or recent Axia control surface at General Store. And I think there were a couple of other places where you could find them, but I saw Marty Sachs just in the traffic at one point, and I saw Kirk go by at some point, but I don't know where everyone was. I think when Marty came before the Nautel group on Sunday, first thing he said was he brought greetings from Frank, who wasn't there. Wanted to ask, okay, so who's going to play Won't Get Fooled Again and close out the show? And I didn't even hang around for the last day, so I will never know.
Well, I can ask Angie. We'll find out. But you mentioned the console. So let's talk about consoles for just a moment. Lavo had the Diamond that they showed for the first time in this country, and Wheatstone had a new thing called Layers that they had multi-touch glass consoles. Anybody take a look at those? Information about either of those consoles? Lavo is like AEQ, sort of a high-end console in Europe. It doesn't seem to have a lot of traction yet in this country, maybe because there is no local building or address or phone number. Have any?
I'm not sure that they have local reps here in this country, do they?
Yes.
I mean, I've talked to one guy and he had an English accent, so I just assumed that they.
Well, it's sort of like you get an 800 number and you never know what country it rings in anymore. Could be Bulgaria, could be England, could be Italy. But Lavo's German, and
didn't they have a deal for a time with either the very end of Dan Braverman or the very beginning of Angry Audio?
Well, Mike Dosh, Catfish, was one of their main marketing guys for the U.S.
Okay, that's what it was.
Clark Novak is still with them in this country, but the problem again, it's not a particularly cheap product. It's a well-built product with a lot of opportunities and features.
And the advertising, the web pages really do seem to look very accessible. They're really trying not to look unusual in any way. You know, we're just one of you.
Mm-hmm.
And I can imagine they're well built. Be like Rode and Schwartz transmitters from Germany.
Yeah.
Well built.
Are these largely just control surfaces and all audio and everything is just a computer in a rack somewhere?
AOIP.
I'd say most of the consoles today are digital operations, not much that you can get just simple analog audio.
My boards in the studios here, 3 wires to hook them up, the power, the ground, and an Ethernet. Just like a
so
keyboard.
There's no audio there, either analog or digital. It's all in the rack.
Right.
In fact, one of the things that I've wrestled with lately is the LPFMs. Why would they want to go spend $10, $12, $15,000 on a console for an LPFM that really no listener is going to know the difference? And yet there's not a lot of analog stuff out there. Probably more used on the market than new. But to make a choice, if you want to say, I'm going to install an analog console, it's not as easy as it used to be.
Well, and then you're marrying a customer to high support costs, because getting the parts for the analog consoles can really, you know, that I can buy a console for the cost of replacing a rotary fader in an old Gates or an old Autogram or something.
Sure, absolutely.
And the glass consoles, all you got to do is get the new screen. No pots, no switches, no anything.
Yeah, that this could be a tablet that they also carry to remotes.
And a lot of window cleaner. You get all those fingerprints off.
They have an off switch so you can do that on a lot.
Right. It was like the old version, the original version of the ELO touchscreen monitors, Scott Studios had them with their systems years ago. And we had a guy sneeze one time and he didn't cover his mouth when he sneezed, and he set off 2 spots playing at the same time.
Well, you
Yeah,
can,
they used to call that stuff that came out when you did that spood.
you can,
Yeah.
you can go even further back to the original of iMedia, when iMedia Touch first came out, and this goes back even before the other companies, and they had one set up in Phoenix, and that's where John Davis and I first met. And of course, up in the dryness of Phoenix, the touch screens had their own little thing, much as we talked about the Ramco on the broadcast list. John Belk mentions here in the chat, there was a presentation, apparently, drones as a viable TV and radio RF measurement tool, success stories, by Jason Schreiber. I know there's going to be a place on the NAB store that you can get these things as a download. I don't know cost.
The proceedings are $75. I went to the booth, got mine, went to the store, and they hand you a card. You don't even get a USB of it now.
Were you able to get just one part, or did you have to?
No, it was $75 presumably for everything they had. The ones I've read, Dave Colastar updated the all digital AM articles. There was actually a paper that included, the authorship included Glenn Walden, and he was talking about where we have gotten with HD radio and some of the things going on, and that they were kind of neat. I've not read the drone ones, but it wasn't a long download, and I don't know if it has every paper, and if they're going to go back and, you'd like for the price to be 100% of the papers.
Yeah. Eric Skase, you put something here in the chat, drops us back to monitoring. Maybe you'd like to talk about that. Your mic was a little soft last time, but you had a thing here about why an HT monitor would be good.
Yeah, well, I was interested in the Inovonics monitor because it's a way of monitoring all of the program channels on the signal and getting alerts when something's off the rails. And also, it's not very easy to check that an FM package is completely compliant with the rules from an outside independent monitoring standpoint. So that seemed useful, and someone said, well, you could listen with a consumer HD radio, and while that's true, I don't think consumer HD radios are necessarily very reliable when it comes to determining whether or not the audio program material is actually the way it should be, because they oftentimes color material one way or another depending on how they're built and what kind of audio outputs they have.
That's true.
So having something that's monitor grade is helpful.
Big problem, of course, is that there's such a small market for mod monitors right now.
Yeah, and even more so for MA1 on AM. And there's nothing for MA3 on AM.
Well, again, they're not required, so nobody wants to have to pay for one. I've got mod monitors at all my sites just simply because I want to see what's going on.
Well, that's the point.
Yeah.
Go back a few years, and it was very unusual for a radio station to have a spectrum analyzer at all. Too many managers said, that's too expensive. We can't do that. But really, if you want to know what you're doing, whether it be NRSC for the AM or for the FM when you install a new transmitter or exciter, can you do it without a spectrum analyzer and really be sure?
I have
Not legally.
How many look at their occupied bandwidth from time to time?
I do, and it's not expensive to get a headless spectrum analyzer that you plug into a laptop. But the problem is, even if you get a spectrum analyzer that says it has an AM or FM demodulation package in it and can give you things like percent modulation, those completely fall apart as soon as you put an RDS carrier in or an SCA or you turn on HD, then suddenly you have no way of determining what the modulation levels are on anything.
One comment about the mod monitors for HD. A lot of stations are running their HD. If they're running HD, their HD signals are automated. Nobody listens to them at the station, and they can be off the air for days or weeks before someone notices. And so to me, it just makes sense to have a monitor on there that's going to trip an alarm. Yeah, you can do it with a silent sensor and all of that, but the simple fact of the matter is that, you know, quite frankly, that Innovonics monitor isn't that expensive when you come right down to it.
I had the Innovonics in a portable case with enough space in the case for the instruction manual and all kinds of connector cables. And once a week, I went to every site and plugged it in and looked at it and made sure everything was okay. And it was handy, and it didn't cost that much. It would have cost 11 times as much to have bought one for each station. And then I had a $75 frequency monitor counter that I bought made in China off somewhere. And that way you could check your frequencies, you know, once a year and make sure everything was on frequency.
I haul around one of these Diva Radio Explorer 2 boxes, and it does everything.
It doesn't do total modulation though?
No, not in the way that a mod monitor does, but at least you can see your frequency deviations, which is, to me, is pretty important.
Yeah, and the Innovonics, you know, you could do your RBDS and your pilot and, you know, all the standard stuff. And it was like, you know, $4 grand, I think, and then a nice portable case to put it in, and just when you needed it, you went there and plugged it up.
Yeah.
When I was in Colorado, I saw a little handheld device that measured total modulation, pilot level, RDS level, decoded RDS, and so on. I don't remember who made that though.
Era makes a couple of things like that, and a couple that are freestanding, and also one that plugs into your laptop. And if you can get it a good RF sample, you know, it and my spectrum analyzer are in general agreement. It's very definitely a secondary reference to secondary references. But I think in this day and age, you get 3 or 4 things looking at you, and it's not 3 watches. They're all within a few percent of each other, a few kilohertz of occupied bandwidth.
Who made that, David?
Pira, P-I-R-A. They're in Czechoslovakia.
Yeah, I've got one of their boxes too. Runs on batteries.
That's
It's a great little box.
It seems like now all of this is just a software problem with software-defined radios. Just put an A to D in front of a computer and it's all software. And I don't know if that's what Innovonics is doing or if there's a lot of hardware in there.
It's got some hardware. It's got presets, channel sets, you know, and for the levels and for looking for all the SCAs, and it's got some actual parts. And it's got 2 antenna inputs on the back, an F connector and a BNC, and you can throw a switch between. So I'd go to a site and set it up with a little wire hanging out the back. And then if it looked weird, I'd hook the coax cable up to the transmitter RF test port and check it that way.
Oh, and come to think of it, it may not be true of the 531, but on the 530, I think the book went on at some length about how they had built this mod monitor around somebody's RF strip. They had bought the radio, and it was the same thing that stereo users would get in a home stereo. And the notes went on about, yeah, so-and-so told us how to bias it properly. So-and-so said, this is how you get 10 dB more signal to noise out of it. And I think the Innovonics may not be now, and it may be SDR inside now, but in this earlier analog version, they were just hot rodding, you know, hi-fi stereo stuff, which, you know, prior to 85, would have been better than the broadcast monitors anyway.
And the older one wasn't very good. It had tuners you adjusted with a little multi-turn pop.
Right.
And the AGC would latch off and latch back on. The 531 though was pretty good monitor.
Yeah, and personally, my antenna of choice, Ken, is usually a paper clip.
I would take a piece of a coax, and then strip the end and have about that much wire sticking out that I could plug in and hang it out and just let it dangle. And that was always a pretty good antenna.
I'll raise the issue this way. Is there also a feeling in the industry that there aren't enough folks that know how to interpret a mod monitor or other test gear anymore?
I don't know. I mean,
no, I don't
used
think so.
one for a very long time, but I don't know about the current market.
You're doing good to find a school that will teach basic electronics, let alone how to read test equipment.
That's what I'm saying. That's what I'm asking.
Yeah, there here in the state of Nebraska, we had about 4 or 5 vocational technical schools back in the 80s, and they're all gone.
Yeah, and what I've noticed is a couple of stations that do have modulation monitors on their FM signals. Their FM signals have got stuff added to them that the modulation monitor was never designed to accommodate. So the actual reading on the monitor doesn't mean anything other than there's some sort of audio.
Well, and they don't understand too, when there's a lot of multipath, the mod monitor is not going to be accurate.
Somebody remembered us the QEI monitor. Mike Friedman, you have a question of a TV thing. Are you orally connected?
Okay, you can hear me now, right?
Yes.
Yeah, I was going to add to that comment about the modulation monitors. Not only that, but a lot of these broadcasters are also supporting SCAs, or they're running HD, and that makes it even harder. You've really got to be on top of your game to know what you're looking at with the modulation monitor, even if it's a newer one. But yeah, I wanted to ask, I'm kind of forced into a situation where I have to move a transmitter, some STLs, out of the main building into another building on premises, multiple towers on the property. Lightning is you know what, when it goes, lightning's a bitch sometimes, right? And we're running fiber between these points, between the main building and where the transmitter will be. And so my question was, I'm looking into using one of the Evertz 7700 series multi-frames. Does anyone have any experience with that? My use would be running AES, running Ethernet out there, run my network out there, and anything else I can come up with. Doesn't look like I can have analog going through the fiber, but maybe there's a solution. Anyone work with these devices? Guess that's a no.
Unfortunately, Wayne had to drop off and go elsewhere. Wayne had been more TV oriented than many of the folks here.
Yeah, it's used in the TV world. That's how I discovered it, because we have a TV station here as well. And I was going to go, look, I just need to get data, and it was going to run copper to the building, but we've had problems with lightning, you know, where we had copper coming into our building from the main tower, and it hasn't always ended up so well. So we were strongly suggested to use fiber, which I get, but then I got to break it out.
Well, you might just talk to John Belk, who's with us, about that aspect of grounding copper properly, or
yeah,
John,
sure would be easier.
You still with us, John? I haven't paid a lot of it.
Yep. All you got to do is just give me a shout. We'll chat. And I'm not a fiber optic user, but from the properties of the fiber themselves, had a lot of history in that for sensing in the past. I doubt that'll be useful, but at least it'll make for a good conversation.
Yeah. Okay. I'm up for that.
Do you have enough contact information?
I'm writing down your information now. I figure I can look you up somehow, some way.
Oh, johnbelk.com will find me. Just go to the
Okay.
CV top of it, or
Got
yeah.
it. Thank you.
Yes, in fact, I went there. That's how I got many of the
Oh, really?
things that you had done.
You were pretty efficient. I
John.
didn't know how that worked. Okay.
So yeah, johnbelk.com.
It's handy.
It is. It is. All right. I guess I'll raise the question here. Is one of the things that, by the way, about mod monitoring and such, a lot of the transmitter manufacturers have actually stuck a readout of modulation on their transmitter, which certainly has contributed to the lack of desire to buy monitors. Question, of course, is how accurate are they? And if they are accurate enough, well, why not just use those?
I think using direct digital synthesis, that it's going to be extremely accurate as long as the clock is accurate. But they know the peak level, so you can easily see that. Now all the pilot and RDS and HD and all that is going to be a different matter, but peak level definitely should be accurate. You also get into what's a peak, and are you allowed to go over for so many microseconds or something?
But that goes back to that old story, doesn't it? But with the Nautel AUI, for instance, we're going to be seeing more diagnostic things than we used to. And it's again sad that most solid state transmitters sit for months or longer without anybody coming to see them, although you can get it down the internet, the data. But the point is that there are things built into these transmitters now that we wish we had 20, 30, 40 years ago.
Hello, can y'all hear me?
Hello, Grady.
Ah, good. For some reason, the little box around my picture doesn't light up when I talk like it used to. I swapped computers. I had a Inovonics 551 here for several months doing beta testing on it, and liked it so much that when the beta testing was over, I bought a 552 for Loud and Clean because it fits in a carry-on suitcase and I can take it to the stations when I go to do consulting work. While I had the 551 here, Broadcast Signal Lab brought their Enritsu analyzer over and did some significant comparative measurements. They hooked their Enritsu directly to the Yagi antenna that I had the 551 connected to and got the same spectrum analyzer display of the station under test. And he couldn't stop talking about how similar what the Inovonics 550 series monitor was showing for the spectrum of the monitored station compared with what his Enritsu was showing. I mean, he couldn't see more than 1 or 2 pixels worth of difference between the traces, and the calibration information along the bottom and the left-hand edge of the screen for level in dB and frequency offset from the center of the channel were exactly what he was seeing on the Enritsu. So I took that as a vote of confidence, and it's one of the reasons that I ended up buying one for my shop.
They're an excellent unit for the money.
All right, I'm going to raise a question here for Eric or David or anybody else who actually made it up to Las Vegas. How did you feel about the show itself? Did you feel that it was worth, Marcos, did you feel it was worth getting there and taking care of everything? Or did you feel that there wasn't enough going on?
Well, I'll be honest and say it was my first NAB show. And it was nice to, that it wasn't super heavily attended, which meant there was time to talk with the engineers or the support people in probably greater detail than I might otherwise have been able to do at a show back in, say, 2019.
Yep.
So that was interesting. On the other hand, I've worked in other industries and done other trade shows, and I have to say there was, I walked away not feeling like I would be going back really soon, maybe a few years from now. I don't think the Las Vegas Convention Center site is a very good site for a show of this type. It's very sprawled out. It's very poorly marked. And I'm sure if you've been there multiple times, you don't think about it anymore. But for somebody new going in, just finding where a conference room might be for a talk was a challenge. And the first talk I wanted to go to, I wound up being 45 minutes late for because I couldn't figure out where it was in the building I was at because the signage in the building was dreadful. And I think given the smaller footprint of the show these days, it could be in Boston or any other city with a moderately large convention facility, and we would not need to put up with the characteristics of Las Vegas. So, my opinion.
Like it used to be.
Finding your way around the convention has always been difficult, and I've wished that Google Maps would work inside the booth or inside the hall. And just say, click on this link and it'll give you directions to get there.
Yeah, the halls themselves don't have good marking. Just finding where registration was, even if you know you're supposed to be at the north building, you can be dropped off on the wrong side of the building, and you have a mile's walk before you can get to a door that you can go into. And inside the building, this normal signage inside the building is awful. And the show itself didn't provide very good navigation. It's like a paper map of the show floors where you could mark people's booths would make it immediately obvious how you wanted to get to use your time in the most effective way. And the little app on your phone is, great for some things, but it doesn't help you with that. So I've found it I felt like a lot of my time there was unnecessarily wasted because of poor human factors design issues.
Hey, Barry, if
Yes,
I
sir.
can chime in with a comment of my own. First of all, I agree wholeheartedly with Eric's description, and I've been to a lot of NAB shows, about 36 of them before I quit going. And yes, it's massive. And if you've never been there before, it is daunting to try to find your way around. One thing that I've noticed, I go to the Texas show in Austin and have done so for off and on the last at least 10 years. That show is growing every year, both in attendees and exhibitors. And what I'm thinking is that we may see a time where instead of a large NAB that, at least in my opinion, is getting more and more expensive to do, we may see more of these regional shows turn into mini NABs, if you will. Austin, at least for me, because I live in Oklahoma City, Austin's a reasonable drive. The hotel rates are reasonable. Yeah, it's kind of hard to get around, but at least I can use my own car. And I just found the TAB show. I see a number of exhibitors. Most of the major people seem to be there, although the exhibits are not the size of football fields. They're quite a bit smaller. But the thing is, you can get in and you can talk to people you need to talk to. And it's a reasonable alternative. And that's my 2 cents worth. That's my story, and I'll stick to it.
Okay. I think one of the issues is in the old days, all the radio manufacturers were in a single area. The TV were in another area. Today, it seems like they're spread out all over the place. Some on the West Wing, some in the Central, some in the North Hall. And the problem is, as was mentioned also, not all the manufacturers had their own booths, and you had to find the manufacturer and you had to find the booth, and it was not always easy. Mr. Garrett, over to you.
Yeah, it was the least satisfying NAB I've been to. I agree. I think the signage was not great. The mapping and the floor markings were awful. Looking at the telephone app, it's like, okay, it's there and it's this number, and you look on the floor and you go, okay, they're going up that way, they're going down this way. Still couldn't find the place. Some of those were kind of crazy. I was most impressed by the number of people I went to see who did not show up, manufacturers and that sort of thing. They could have probably done the entire thing in the West Wing. Things were spread out. The booths were a little bit more space between booths. It was great on day one. You could, like someone else had said, you can go up and talk to people. There wasn't a big line, but it was generally disappointing, I think.
I think they had high hopes and they didn't quite get there.
They were about 5/8 of normal traffic as far as people. But of course, if you know your people you want to see, you're not going to be there, you don't go.
They also create a large problem with the 2020 convention having been canceled, and they kept the money. They were only going to let the manufacturers get it back in dribs and drabs if they had committed to the next 3 to 5 years. And I know of at least several manufacturers that said they've had it with the NAB. They'll go to Texas, to the TAB, and that is one of the better regional ones that I've seen. I've been to a couple. The Great Lakes one up in Lansing is another good one, or was.
On regional shows, it seems like as there are a lot of them, it gets expensive for manufacturers to have to do 6 shows a year or something. And on NAB keeping the money, that's an interesting contract question. I don't know what the contract said there.
Well, it all depends, who canceled and what and how and what the lawyers did in those 50-some pages. But the point is that we talked about this, was it last week or the week before, briefly, about the traveling show that has picked up after Larry Bloomfield had passed away. The next best thing, they call it now. I see your hand, Kirk. And some of these sort of ad hoc meetings have had only 5 or 6 or 8 people. Others have been better attended. But I think to a certain extent, several manufacturers have determined that probably doing a roving crew is probably easier than the NAB at this point. Kirk?
There we go. Let me unmute. Hey, hi everybody. Sorry, I'm driving, and excuse the bad audio from the earbuds. As most of you know, Telos did not have a booth there. We decided to save our $500,000 that it normally costs us to go there, and the salespeople divided the money amongst ourselves and told the CEO that the booth was great. No. But we did send 9 people there. We met a lot of folks, and I hope we'll be back with a good sized booth in the future. We had to make the decision about going or not going during the Delta variant, and so it was a little bit of a dark time. And we also had heard that CES, because I think CES traffic was 20% of normal. And now, of course, once we got there, if you guys were there, the traffic I thought was pretty good on Sunday, amazingly good on Monday, still pretty good on Tuesday, and then of course Wednesday it was vendor day. I'll take a contrarian view. I agree totally that the booth signage, and the directions and the booth numbers were just abysmal. I don't know why they don't put street names on the aisles. Yes, we're at 43 Alabama Street or something like that. I think that'd be a little easier. Put street signs up. That numbering system is just bananas.
You have to have the names in alphabetical order, though, so you know which way to turn.
That's a good idea. Well, they do that here in Nashville. We've got a whole section of town that's named after states, and they're in alphabetical order, I think.
A lot of states do that. Denver does that. The problem with the the convention center, both CES and NAB, is if you try to write down the number of the booth that you want to visit, the problem is that they're not numerically together. And so if you start with the 1500s, you may have to go all the way down to the end of the hall and then come all the way back to somebody that's in the front of the 1600.
Oh, yeah,
Wow.
yeah. And so the reason I suggested street names is that, sorry, I'm getting the mail out of the mailbox here, is that, you know, I started telling people, hey, meet me at the Broadcast Bionics booth. It's behind the big vMix booth in the North Hall. Because you could see the vMix booth because it was tall and Bionics was a short booth. So you give somebody a reference to something else that you can see, and that seemed to work out okay. But yeah, I agree. They got to do something. Now, I will take a contrarian view on other aspects of getting around. I found the registration signage to be perfectly adequate. And when I got dropped off at the wrong side of the West Hall on, it must have been Saturday, to attend the BEA and be on a panel there, Uber dropped me off at the wrong side. And there were employees, there were people out there saying, hi, registration's right around there. It's kind of a long walk. Have a good day. So I thought that worked okay. And the COVID, no COVID thing seemed to work out fine. I couldn't seem to bring up the app on my phone for my vaxes. And so I had my cardboard card ready, showed that, and the lady said, you're great, go on in, and gave me a pass. I like, you know, the Tesla loop, or, you know, the loop thing. That was fun enough. Yeah, they could have had it in a single hall. Although, you know, the Adobe booth, the Blackmagic booth, and the Ross booth, those were enormous, and there were some other big ones too. So I'm not sure you actually could fit all that into one hall.
The question was raised. The question was raised, Kirk. Did you play "Won't Get Fooled Again"?
No, that didn't get played. No, the end of the show was pretty milquetoast. The last thing I'll say, though, is that it was a genuine pleasure to see people again and shake their hands and, you know, give them hugs where appropriate. And I had the advantage of getting out there early because I went to the PREC, and I got there a day before that and spent a day in Red Rock Canyon. And then Friday, I spent the day in Valley of Fire. So I had some enjoyment, you know, before and after and around. So that kind of got me used to Las Vegas again. But seeing people and shaking their hands and seeing them in person was such a pleasure. And everybody I talked to was expressing the same emotion, that they were delighted to get back together. That's it.
I've heard that from a number of people, that if they could, they wanted to, but there were many reasons why others didn't, including age, relatives, and of course the cost of travel today. And if you found out that the company you were most interested in wasn't there, that was another reason not to go.
Yeah, that's what really pissed me off, bartender.
Well, I know we were going to try to get together. Didn't know what we were going to do, whether it was going to be a Tuesday or a Monday lunch gathering. We were talking about doing that this year. I was waiting to find out about how that Marriott across the street from the West Hall was. I think it was a Marriott. And but I didn't get a chance to, or at least haven't heard from anybody yet. I did hear that the buffet at the Westin was open this time, which was interesting.
Yes, it was. I ate there yesterday, and honestly, felt pretty sick on the way home and this morning.
Aha. Well, then we go back to the question, what else to do? There's so, well, the West Hall is a little closer to the Denny's, I guess, but I don't think you take a big group in there.